Thank you for your interest in the Eide Paycheck Protection Program Loan Forgiveness Application Model. We've designed an Excel-based forgiveness tool to help lenders work with their borrowers in completing the loan forgiveness application under the Paycheck Protection Program. We're going to start our demonstration today with the end in mind, which is the completed application itself. We've designed our tool to provide the borrower and the lender the opportunity to complete all necessary form items with the use of this Excel model and have a completed application in hand when it's completed. As I walk through this demo here, we're going to start with the end in mind, which is with the loan forgiveness application itself. As I mentioned, we're trying to provide the borrower and the lender with a completed application once they've gone through our model. So we start with the application itself, a completed Excel-based application that's built right into our model that starts with all of the applicable fields and sections, which will all tie in to all of the various tabs that are within our workbook. Again, with the end in mind, we want to achieve maximum loan forgiveness for our borrower. And so we provide the tools necessary for them to get there. When the borrower is done working through the model and working with the lender will have the ability to print the completed application and utilize tools such as DocuSign in order to obtain the appropriate signatures from the borrower and submit a completed loan forgiveness application through the eTran system. All right, so let's take a look at working through our model and working through our workbook. We've designed it with several tabs that are independently utilized throughout the course of this workbook to achieve certain components of the loan forgiveness application. We've established essentially a 10-step process that provides all of the necessary fields that are required for the borrower to complete the application. So we start with our borrower data needed tab, which is what the lender will be able to provide as a documentation checklist or questionnaire for our borrower to complete. This has been laid out very similar to the actual loan forgiveness application itself, which the SBA has provided a list of required documents that are needed in order to complete the application. And so our borrower data needed section closely mirrors the required items that are listed within the application and is broken out in terms of payroll related items, FTE related items, non-payroll related items, and then additional documentation that is required but not necessarily required to be submitted by the borrower. All of these items have been vetted by our SBA champions team and would be beneficial information for the borrower to obtain and provide to the lenders as part of their loan forgiveness application. Our next step in our demo is our initial information input section, where we provide some of the general information that is required to complete our application, such as our legal business name, business address, primary contact information, and all of the other items that are included as part of the initial portion of our loan forgiveness application. With this section, our lender can then compare the information that is provided by the borrower with the information that was initially provided in the initial application, and we can start the process of going through the loan forgiveness application. We provide fields to provide the loan disbursement amounts, the disbursement dates, which then automatically calculate our covered periods for the borrower, provide information related to our payroll schedules, which can be determined to determine if the borrower is going to use an alternative covered payroll period. If they are applicable to using that period, we give them the opportunity through a variety of different drop downs to provide that relevant information so that the information is provided to both the borrower and the lender. Additionally, we also provide a couple of other useful questions as part of our general inputs tab to help the lender understand the depth needed within the review piece, as well as providing information for the borrower to have a general understanding of what tabs are needed to be completed. One of the important questions we ask is whether or not the business has any employees, which is question number 20. With that question, we help to determine whether or not the borrower must complete all tabs within the workbook or whether they complete only certain sections if they're a self-employed individual with no additional employees. So with a simple change in our dropdown, it provides the appropriate direction so that our borrower can complete all of the necessary fields that are required. As a result, through a variety of different formulas within the Excel workbook, it eliminates potential errors by having fields that are completed inappropriately from impacting our estimated loan forgiveness. We also provide the opportunity for a borrower to disclose to the lender which method they're using in terms of calculating average FTEs. In doing so, this helps the lender in the review process understand if there's any anomalies or differences that might impact the FTE calculation and not follow compliance with the final rules and guidance that's out there for the borrowers to comply with. Now let's walk through the journey of completing the respective fields that'll help us determine our loan forgiveness. We start with our payroll information, and the application provides a PPP Schedule A worksheet for us to be able to utilize as a starting point for determining loan forgiveness. And this information flows through to Schedule A within the instructions. And so what we've done is provided all of the relevant pieces. We've cut, carved, and pasted in the information that is applicable for each of the sections so that it is in one easy place. So we provide the definitions for all of the related fields that are utilized to complete our worksheet so that the borrower can have a clear understanding of what is needed. And then we provide the information and the space to complete the necessary fields. We've also incorporated additional rows for employers that have multiple employees and their ability to unhide those rows to be able to fill the additional information. And so with this, we start down the journey of determining our calculation. With our employees that are receiving compensation of less than 100,000, we provide all of the necessary information from that Schedule A worksheet, as well as a calculation to determine our salary and wage reduction. And this is linked to further tabs that we'll go through later on in this demonstration. We've also designed certain conditional formatting components to help easily identify if information does not meet compliance. So as we know, our cash compensation is capped for any one individual employee at $15,385 if we're using the 8-week period. So if I change our formula or our number for our cash compensation, it clearly identifies if it is out of compliance and will flag it so that the borrower knows that they need to revise their information. This has been built in throughout for both cash compensation and average FTE fields so that this is easily identifiable and can be corrected by either the borrower or the lender. Our next tab is our Payroll Table 2 tab, which discloses information for employees that are compensated of more than 100,000. And similar to our previous table, we've also built in the conditional formatting to limit the information to be in compliance with the regulations. Let's jump into our salary and wage reduction approach, which is one of our larger and more cumbersome pieces of determining our loan forgiveness. When we reviewed the calculation and the application form, we identified a couple of potential expedients which can help the borrower work through the process a little bit quicker, and we built those expedients into our model. One of the questions on Schedule A is to help determine if there were any salary or hourly wage employees that received reductions through the February 15th cutoff through a covered period. And so our expedient allows the borrower to disclose whether any employees were impacted and had salary reductions. And in doing so, we help create a pathway for determining how much information is required for them to provide. So if they did have salary or hourly wage reduction to any employees, they would check the box yes and proceed to the next section. If they check the box no, they know through our conditional formatting that they are not required to complete any additional fields within this table. As we progress down, you'll see that we've pre-populated some of the information for purposes of this demo, and this information will be calculated based on the rules that are within the application form itself. And again, we've carved and cut and copied the information from the application and tied them to our corresponding tables so that it is easy for the borrowers to understand what this information is utilized for. We provided specific information, again, through formulas that will drive to the next level of steps within the calculation, which again ties directly to the formulas in the application itself, and they can progress forward for each of their employees that are impacted to which no safe harbor is met. At the end of our particular tab here, we ultimately get to determining what our salary reduction is for each specific employee that has been impacted by this reduction, which carries back to our table on Payroll Table 1. Notice that when we went through right at the beginning, we have our calculation expedient that we identified that we did not have any employees that were impacted. And based on this disclosure, it will impact whether or not the information will pull into our table and then ultimately into our Schedule A. So when I change this, our formatting will now impact whether or not that information is included on our Schedule A. So for purposes of the demo, we're going to keep it that they did have a salary reduction, in which case we've completed all the necessary fields, and we'll move on. Our next section relates to our owner payroll tables and disclosures, as we have come to learn that owners are treated a little bit differently for purposes of the payroll protection program and what is applicable and allowable from a income and payroll perspective for employers. And we have again built in through formulas the necessary calculations to be able to determine the allowable amount of cash compensation to be utilized by any specific employer. And again, for reference to the borrower, they have the ability to read the specific legislation and regulation that is within the application itself to be able to provide the backdrop and the background for the inputs that are going into the calculation. And again, this information is scattered throughout our model. Our next tab is determining our FTE safe harbors, and we've built in a couple of different methods in order to do so. But we start with the first question of whether or not the borrower is a seasonal employer. And we've built in the ability for our seasonal employers to provide the relevant information for determining their FTEs if they decide to use an alternative seasonal date. And so by changing through dropdowns, we've got the ability to determine whether or not the seasonal employer methodology and alternative seasonal date range will be utilized. And in doing so, will impact which chosen reference period will be utilized by the borrower. So based on our first dropdown, we'll determine the information that's provided. And then we begin the process of determining which items will be utilized for determining that reference period. So for purposes of the demo, we're going to assume that we are not a seasonal employer, and we are going to provide the information for our reference period average FTEs based on the reference periods that are referred to above, which again ties to the regulation and original CARES Act guidance. We have provided a couple of different opportunities to disclose that FTE information, as we assume that many employers will be able to access payroll records through a variety of different payroll providers that might be able to provide information in summary reports through their payroll software. And so we've given them the opportunity to provide information in total based on total FTEs from those payroll reports. Or if they're more inclined to do so, they can provide information on an employee by employee basis. And again, we've given them enough runway room to be able to provide that information. All of the calculations that are built in within the model will be utilized to provide the information in either of those instances and come up with the appropriate number for purposes of FTE. Our next section within the FTE Safe Harbor worksheet is, again, another calculation expedient that is included on Schedule A of our payroll application, which allows for borrowers to disclose whether or not they did have a reduction in FTE or an average paid hours for your employees, basically during the year through the end of the covered period. And again, we've given the opportunity for our borrowers to take and utilize this practical expedient, and in doing so, hopefully eliminate undue and unnecessary work for the borrower. So if we've determined that there are no reductions in FTEs and they can safely disclose that, we give them the option to complete the dropdown. And then although this information is pre-populated, by selecting the appropriate dropdown, it will not have a negative impact on our FTE calculation and our ultimate loan forgiveness calculation. And again, through conditional formatting, if we did have reductions in our workforce that we need to determine any potential FTE reduction penalties, we can move on to the next steps, which are further below in section C. Again, we've carved and cut all of the different components that are included within the application itself, provided the necessary instructions in order to be able to complete each section. And we've completed each step to where the borrower understands the information that is required to complete the particular components of the schedule. So we're going to move on and we're going to talk very briefly about our FTE reduction exceptions. And recently, as of June 8th, Congress has passed the updates to our loan forgiveness and our Paycheck Protection Program through the Flexibility Act, which has provided additional exceptions to our FTE rules, and we've incorporated that into our model as well. And so we can utilize any of our exception reasons to help offset any potential negative impacts to our FTE reductions. And again, through dropdowns, we've provided all of the allowable exception reasons to be disclosed for any particular employees that have departed and have not been replaced. And we allow them the ability to disclose that information to the lender so that we can have that source information all included in one place. If an employee has not been replaced, it will impact our FTE reduction exception, and we will get benefit of not rehiring back that employee if any of the exception reasons have been met. From a non-cash compensation perspective, we've also provided a tool to be able to track the expenses that have been paid and incurred during our covered period for items such as group health insurance, which we perceive to be health insurance, dental insurance, and vision insurance, and be able to track those costs over the course of our covered period, as well as provide items based on a week-by-week basis for our retirement benefits and our state and local taxes, and that's specific to the employer costs. So again, they can utilize this tab to track all of those employer-related costs that are allowable payroll costs for purposes of our loan forgiveness calculation. We also provide a schedule similar to disclose the information related to our non-payroll costs that are allowed for loan forgiveness purposes, which include interest on mortgage and personal property, rents, and utilities, which we've defined and listed out based on the information within the CARES Act and within the final rules that help provide additional guidance. Again, we give them the opportunity to track on a week-by-week basis, as well as on a basis of determining our incurred costs that are paid after the end of our covered period as well. We provide an additional tab for the borrower to understand what their estimated loan forgiveness is based on how they completed the calculation. So they can easily compare the three potential outcomes, which is full forgiveness based on their original loan amount, estimated forgiveness based on eligible payroll and non-payroll costs, and the revised 60% payroll cost requirement, which was passed in the most recent legislation. Again, this will allow the borrower to determine and track their costs and the closeness that they receive forgiveness for determining their ultimate loan forgiveness. And so they can use this as their playbook for understanding how quickly they're going to achieve loan forgiveness. The tabs that are outlined in orange, which again is the end goal of having a completed loan forgiveness, will be completed in full on both the Schedule A and the loan forgiveness applications. And again, these can be printed out and included in the loan files for our lenders. What we're recommending through consultation with our banks that have utilized this application form already is the intent to keep these forms, the actual form and Schedule A, locked down and be able to release this to their borrowers once the lender has determined that all the appropriate components have been completed by the applicant. And once that has been achieved, they'll once again be able to print off the application form and Schedule A and utilize DocuSign to not only obtain the signature from the borrower, but also complete all of the required certifications that are required to be completed as part of the application form. A couple of additional tools to talk through quickly is our payroll tracking tool, which again provides the borrower the ability to track their payroll throughout our covered period. And so this worksheet provides them with the additional runway room to be able to provide all of the information needed for payroll related purposes. This is an optional tab, which again can be utilized for purposes of determining their payroll costs, but it is not necessary and is simply an add-on or additional tool for their disposal. With that, I'd like to thank you for working with Eide Bailly and showing interest in our model. And I hope you have a great day, and thank you very much for your time.